Marcus Freeman just gave us a very clear look into where things stand for this Notre Dame team after the loss to Miami and how they're preparing for Texas A&M. From missed tackles to missed opportunities, here's what stood out and what it all means going forward.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum, producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish for the past 5 seasons. Today is Tuesday, September 9th, and thanks as always for making this your first watch or listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. And by the way, if you have not already, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube or follow along wherever you get your podcasts. It helps keep the show free and helps you stay up to date on our daily coverage of Notre Dame football. And don't forget, the Friday mailbag is coming up, so drop your questions in the YouTube comments or send them over on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. All right. Today's show is going to be a little bit different than normal, considering we are coming off a bye week. There is no game to provide our final thoughts on, which is what we normally do on Tuesdays during the season with Luke Smith. But this episode is going to be all about Marcus Freeman's press conference that he held on Monday. It was the first time that we have heard from him since the night of the Miami loss, and he had a lot to say. We're not going to go over every single quote because that would be a little bit insane, but I do think there was a lot of important things that he addressed in his press conference, and we're going to talk about what went wrong for Notre Dame against Miami and how Notre Dame approached the bye week and what exactly needs to change heading into this huge matchup against Texas A&M in the home opener. There is some real insight into what Marcus Freeman had to say, and obviously coaches are going to be a little bit guarded in any sort of press conference situation, but Marcus Freeman was pretty revealing, and we got some insight into how he's been approaching this entire situation because Notre Dame is obviously going to play a huge game on Saturday with so much on the line. But the first thing I want to talk about is the team's mindset after the loss. When he was asked about it, this is what Marcus Freeman had to say. Quote, I think it was very similar to their head coach. They are disappointed, frustrated, and when you invest a lot into achieving a certain outcome, it hurts. There's sleepless nights, there's loss of appetite, but what we have to do is we had to turn that frustration into work, and we did. To me, this is very important because the team took the loss personally, which is exactly what they should do, right? Because even if we as fans can eventually forgive a performance like that. Like I joked about it on the show, how it was almost weird for me to be so not emotional about the loss in the days after because I looked at it like, okay, Notre Dame loses a game. Everything is still in front of them the rest of the season. They lost on the road against a top 10 team by 3 points with a quarterback who's making his first collegiate start. Like that is a very forgivable loss for people on the outside of the program. But you can't have the locker room okay with any sort of loss because they played below the standard, and the standard has to hurt when it's not met. So it's actually encouraging to hear that there were some sleepless nights inside the Goog and that they weren't feeling too hot after that loss, and they were really pissed off because I know Marcus Freeman was really upset, even if he didn't fully show it in that post-game press conference. He also understands the stakes in this modern era of college football with the 12-team playoff. One loss doesn't ruin a season, but it puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the game. So it's good to see that the team has that sense of urgency going forward. And there's a big difference, in my opinion, between like public accountability and private urgency. This wasn't just Marcus Freeman trying to do some damage control to the media. It sounds like this was a raw and uncomfortable week in the building. And I always joke about this. Like, it's very rare that we get glimpses of Marcus Freeman on the practice field and how he really gets on players all the time, has a very old school mentality, because when you see him at a press conference, when you see him in interviews, he's very charismatic, dressed really nice, all that good stuff. But man, he is a very hard football coach, and I am sure, based on his comments, if you read between the lines a little bit, it's probably not a whole super fun week of practice for the Irish out there in the IAC and also on the outdoor practice fields as well. And I think if you contrast that with some other teams who didn't really have super high expectations, a loss like that, they probably just forget about it and move on. But I don't believe that's the case with this team. But with any loss, it's also on the players to hold everyone else accountable. And we've talked a lot on the show about how the captains in particular did not really play well against Miami in that season opener. But coming off a loss, the rest of the team is going to turn to them for leadership. And Marcus Freeman spoke about that as well. He said, quote, I couldn't be more proud of the way our captains lead. I don't want the title of captain to be associated with production at all. I want the title of captain to be associated with leadership and the influence you must have on the people who have chosen you to be captain. Now, in this moment, Marcus Freeman was talking about Emil Wagner and Billy Schrauth in particular because he was asked about them. And I think we all understand that Emil Wagner had maybe the worst game of his career at Notre Dame. We know he's a good player. He has shown that. He held up pretty well against Abdul Carter, a top 3 pick in the NFL draft when Notre Dame took on Penn State in the college football playoff. He held his own in the season opener last year, his first career start against Texas A&M, who had 3 NFL draft picks on that defensive line. We know he's a good player. And Marcus Freeman also pointed out that Billy Schrauth actually graded out as one of the highest graded players on the offense in this game. And that's interesting because the whole offensive line was under attack. And we're going to talk more about them in segment 2 because they clearly did not play well in that game. But considering Notre Dame has 2 captains on the offensive line, it's a little bit more glaring. But I think the fact that Marcus Freeman made the distinction between production and leadership, that's critical, especially early on in the season. Because if you tie captaincy too close to production, you kind of risk undermining your entire leadership structure every time a guy has a bad game. And even the best players are going to have bad games. Now, in an ideal world, you want your best players to be the captains and be the best leaders, but that's not how it always works. But it also gives us some insight into how Marcus Freeman sees the locker room hierarchy. Like, even when production dips a little bit, someone has a bad game, he understands that the captains have to own the response, and it sounds like they did that during the bye. He also mentioned Drake Bowen in particular. He was also asked about him, so it wasn't like he just brought him up out of nowhere. But he said Drake Bowen would tell you that he didn't play his best game against Miami, and he has really owned that. He's put in more time. He's really frustrated, and I fully expect Drake Bowen to bounce back in a big way against Texas A&M because he's another guy who we have seen succeed on the biggest stages in college football. We know he's a great leader. Sometimes even good players have bad games, and I expect Emil Wagner, Billy Schrauth, and Drake Bowen to bounce back in a big way, and also take accountability for their own lackluster performance against Miami and then build on that going into Texas A&M. But coming off that loss, there was a bye week in between. And I've mentioned it before, as a fan, it was really unfortunate to wait 8 months, right, to watch Notre Dame play football. They play a big-time game, and then we got to wait nearly 2 weeks before they play another game. But it also presents an interesting problem for the coaching staff because most people don't have byes in week 2. But Notre Dame played on a Sunday night, so it was actually more beneficial for them to have a bye because if they had to play Texas A&M 6 days after playing Miami in that kind of game, which is very physical, I don't think it would have gone very well for Notre Dame. But Marcus Freeman talked about how this bye week was a little bit different. He said it wasn't your typical game week practice. It was a lot of good on good practice reps and a very intentional bye week. It was not just about recovery because if you think about it, they basically had to replace the physicality and the intensity of playing a full college football game because that's what Texas A&M did. Even though they beat up on Utah State in week 2, they still went out there and they played a full football game. So Notre Dame went a lot of good on good in practice, and I think that's great because you don't really get to do that a ton during the actual season. It's a lot of first team going up against a scout team, and that's just not the same. But when you're trying to rebuild confidence, you're trying to gain that edge, gain that violence, gain that physicality after a loss in the season opener, I think the bye week came at a good time. And I really like the decision to go good on good here because this team didn't really need walkthroughs. They didn't really need film-heavy practices or anything like that. They needed competition. They needed to get punched in the mouth a little bit because they got punched in the first game of the season. They need to know how to punch back because Texas A&M is going to come into this game ready to throw a punch. And I think it speaks to the self-awareness of Marcus Freeman. He understands his team. He knows that they can't be too physical. They can't go like full-blown scrimmages bringing guys to the ground because they are in the season. And this is, something they want to be a really long season, right? They want it to be a 16-game regular season. So it's a tough balance. It's a tricky balancing act for this coaching staff, but I do like that they went good on good here. And I feel like when you look at this press conference as a whole, this was Freeman at his most introspective, but also his most assertive. He didn't lash out or blame the players or the coaches. Instead, he acknowledged the pain and defeat, praised the response, and used the bye week to recalibrate this entire program. That is the kind of leadership you want, as long as the result on the field is a little bit different on Saturday. But what exactly did Notre Dame do wrong against Miami in the eyes of Freeman, and how do they plan to fix it before facing one of the best teams left on the schedule? That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. This grape, ginger, and lime flavored shot brings the iconic taste of a golf course favorite to a non-alcoholic boost. Perfect for sinking birdies or making great memories with friends. It's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Whether you're out on the course or just need a little extra push to power through your day, 5 Hour Energy Transfusion delivers the clubhouse flavor you love without ever leaving the green. I don't know about you, but my friends love making tee times super early in the morning, and on paper, it makes sense. The course is usually wide open, and you have the rest of your day to do whatever you want when you're done with your 18. But when the alarm clock is going off at 5 a.m., I always have some regrets until I have my 5 Hour Energy drink. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors. The grape ginger lime flavor of 5 Hour Energy Transfusion gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without leaving the course or chasing down the bev cart. Now you can amp up the fun even more. Just buy, snap, and enter for a chance to win a dream golf trip for two to any golf tournament in the USA. Tee up that trip. Visit 5hewin.com for full rules and entry. No purchase necessary. Excludes the Masters Tournament. Ends October 31st, 2025. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you will get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Personally, I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it be player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sundays. You can also add a little bit more energy to your Thursdays, and that is what we're going to do this week. Here's my pick. I like the Packers minus 3.5 at home against the Commanders on Thursday Night Football. Look, I understand the Commanders have Jane Daniels. They looked pretty good in week 1, but did you see that Packers defense? They just shut down the Detroit Lions for the entire game. Obviously, they added Micah Parsons, but he is not the only good player on that side of the ball. Meanwhile, you've got Jordan Love throwing the ball all over the yard. So I like the Packers minus 3.5 on Thursday. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Another downside to having a bye week in week 2, especially after a loss, is that fans have 13 days to pick apart every little thing that went wrong for Notre Dame. And we have talked about a lot of the things that Notre Dame needed to address on this show. But it was interesting to hear what Marcus Freeman thought went wrong against Miami. And he talked about it in his opening statement. I summed it up to this, quote, "There was a lot. Takeaways, ball security, tackling, third down on both sides, short yardage, 2-minute. We didn't start fast in either half." He would expand on that, but that about sums it up. And unfortunately, that's a lot of things that Notre Dame needs to clean up after the Miami loss and going forward against Texas A&M. But I think that Freeman's long list confirms what the eye test already showed. Execution was poor across the board. Yes, they needed to give the ball to Jeremiyah Love more. Yes, the offensive line needed to be more physical. Yes, the defensive line was getting gashed up the interior at certain points. They missed too many tackles. The defense was a little bit hesitant at certain points. But the fact is that it was the first game on the road, and Notre Dame struggled to start out both halves. The first half is pretty forgivable, right? You're going into a hostile road environment with the quarterback making his first career start. They're trying to get him into a rhythm early. They go down, but it was really the start of the second half that was inexcusable, right? Notre Dame needed to get a stop on defense, and then Miami just kind of pushed them around that whole drive. That is what Notre Dame used to do to teams, or at least that's what they did last year that was so critical to their success. They always won the middle eight. Unfortunately, Miami won the toss and elected to defer, so they didn't even have the opportunity to do that in this situation. But the fact that they allowed the touchdown to C.J. Daniels, which was an incredible catch, going into the end of the half, and then for Miami to come out and then just bully them, like, to me, that was the biggest issue. And yeah, 2-minute, like, at the end of the game, they had Styles Prescott in at left tackle, and Emil Wagner was probably compromised as well at right tackle. So I don't put a ton of stock into that. But the fact that Notre Dame turned the ball over twice and they didn't register any turnovers or didn't create any takeaways of their own was critical. So all of this stuff makes sense. It's all what we expected to hear. But then Marcus Freeman got a little bit more specific. So let's talk about the defense, right? Because he was asked about the scheme and the adjustments, and this being Chris Ash's first game as a defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And there was one thing that really stood out to me. He said, quote, "There were a couple plays that we probably were paralyzed a little bit. We have to be able to make adjustments." Paralyzed is not what you want to hear, about your defense. It's not what you want to hear about anything. And he actually used that term twice in this press conference. But we'll start first with his comments about the defense. Because if they're paralyzed, it suggests that they're confused and they're hesitating in the middle of a play. That can't happen. That cannot happen. You cannot play fast. You cannot play free if you're paralyzed. And if they're paralyzed because of the scheme or they don't know what they're seeing in front of them, that falls back on the coaching staff. And sure, Miami did throw Notre Dame some new looks on third down that they weren't expecting. And I think this is where the loss of Jack Kaiser and Xavier Watts comes in, because those guys had seen it all. They can solve problems on the field. That's what Al Golden used to compliment them so much. Like, he would say all the time that they were basically coaches on the field. They could figure things out on the fly and make sure that everyone else around them would get to where they needed to be. And right now, Notre Dame doesn't have that. They have leaders like Drake Bowen, but Drake Bowen is only a redshirt sophomore. Adon Schuler is a redshirt sophomore. Two captains in the middle of that defense who have played one full season of football as a starter, but that's nothing compared to what Xavier Watts and Jack Kaiser have seen. So it's not all on Chris Ash. They are replacing some serious veteran leadership on that defense that does not just come in the form of playing football and the talent, right? It also has to do with understanding everything that's going on around them. But it also is on Chris Ash and the staff for not having this defense fully prepared or potentially making things a little bit too complicated. Because when you have young guys who haven't played a ton of football, you have to make things a little bit simple. And I think going into week 2, Chris Ash needs to simplify things on this defense. Let the players play fast and let Notre Dame's talent advantage take over. Because Texas A&M has a bunch of talent as well. And even though Notre Dame has a slight talent advantage, at least in my opinion, on that side of the ball, that can go away quickly if they don't know where they're going. But it wasn't just about the scheme, right? It was about the tackling and the physicality, because Miami did bully them at certain points. And Marcus Freeman said, quote, "We can't go live tackling, but we have to be intentional. You've got to thud and stop their momentum." And he also clarified that a lot of their missed tackles actually came in the box, not in space, which to me is a physicality and fundamentals issue. It's not just open field breakdowns, which we all understand. Tackling in the open field is a lot harder to do. But when there's a crowd and guys are just kind of bouncing off players in the box, like, that's critical. When Miami got the ball back and they had to score either a field goal or a touchdown to take the lead late, right after Notre Dame had tied it, the first play of that drive, they ran a little slant route, guy catches the ball, bounces off 3 tackles, and then makes it 2nd and 1. That can't happen. Leonard Moore missed a tackle. Drake Bowen missed a tackle. And it was right there in the middle of the field. You have to get that guy down earlier, because by making it 2nd and 1, Miami has all the advantage in that situation, especially in a late game situation. So Notre Dame absolutely has to clean that up. And Marcus Freeman is clearly emphasizing thudding and better technique, because even if you aren't bringing a guy down, if you stop their momentum completely, you've probably got him wrapped up pretty solid. And that was a real concern, or that is a real concern, going into a game against Texas A&M, where they have talented running backs like Ruben Owens and Le'Veon Moss, and really talented and speedy wide receivers like Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver as well. So Notre Dame has to win with toughness, and that did not show against Miami all the time. But A&M is absolutely going to test them, so they have to figure out how to tackle and get guys down. Now on offense, what's the main thing that we've been talking about and why Notre Dame struggled to move the ball? They did not give the ball to their best player. And Marcus Freeman recognized that. He said, quote, "We know we want to focalize our offense around Jay Love. He's a special player." And I think this is essentially Marcus Freeman admitting they didn't get the ball to Love enough. He's not going to come out and say, like, hey, CJ Carr wasn't giving it to him enough. But if you kind of read between the lines of what he was saying, he understands that, like, yeah, sometimes they have to be more intentional, saying, like, look, it's an RPO, and if they're stacking 8 to 9 guys in the box, yes, you can throw, but we want to give the ball to Jeremiyah Love here. So if it's in the gray area, just hand him the ball. But if it's gray, you can't just use that as an excuse to keep your best player uninvolved. And part of that is on CJ Carr, obviously, but I think it's more on Mike Denbrock and Gino Guidugli to make their intentions clear. Like, hey, we really want to give the ball to Jeremiyah Love in this situation. So if the numbers are even close to what you need them to be, just give him the ball, because, as we've said before, the rules don't apply to a player like Jeremiyah Love. He is just that good. He can break tackles, and he can turn pretty much any play into a huge game. So I expect a very intentional effort from Notre Dame and this coaching staff to feed Jeremiyah Love and Jadarian Price early and often against Texas A&M, especially considering how much they have struggled to stop the run. Carter Carrolls and I talked about that in our insider preview yesterday. Make sure you go check that episode out if you have not already. But also, this is on CJ Carr and how Notre Dame tried to baby him a little bit, and Marcus Freeman even admitted they were trying to keep things really simple for him early on. But after that game, I think you could sense a switch in how Marcus Freeman is going to approach CJ Carr going forward, because he even admitted CJ can execute the entire game plan. He's a special player, and he also joked that if you gave CJ the opportunity, he's going to throw the ball downfield every play. So they're clearly trying to rein him in, which they should, because he's still very young. He's a redshirt freshman. He's going to be making his first career home start this weekend. But you've got to let him air it out a little bit, because if you don't, then the defense is just going to creep up, and now the box is stacked, and now you can't really do anything that you want. Like all that horizontal passing stuff, that's not going to work if the corners and their safeties are reading that and they're expecting that, and that's exactly what happened on the interception. The Miami corner jumped it, and sure, the ball popped up in the air, got kicked at one point, but that doesn't happen if the Miami corner doesn't just completely blow that play up right away. So Freeman knows that they were cautious, but he also says he's ready for the full playbook now. They're going to try to push the ball vertically, and they're going to have to do it because Texas A&M is going to be very aggressive on offense. They've been very aggressive on offense. They've got some big play threats at wideout and in their backfield. So you can't just play this game conservatively trying to run 11 screen passes like they did last week. They're going to have to push the ball a little bit downfield, and I think they're going to be more willing to do that with CJ Carr. But in order for CJ Carr to do that, he's going to need time, and that ultimately falls on the offensive line. And there was one thing that Marcus Freeman said about the offensive line that I thought was really important. He said, at times, I thought we were a little too lateral. That doesn't sound good, right? You don't want your offensive line moving laterally. You want them to be moving north-south, and specifically north, pushing down the field. And even though in pass protection you can't go vertical, pass protection doesn't have to be passive. That's a great saying by offensive linemen, and I think he wants to see a very aggressive group from his offensive line going into this game because it wasn't always there against Miami. By the end of the game, they were certainly on their heels when they had Emil Wagner just trying to stay alive, and then they had Styles Prescott in for Anthony Knapp. Like, those guys didn't stand a chance, but overall, I think the group was too hesitant and too reactive. That's going to be a problem against a defense like Texas A&M that thrives on causing havoc plays and things like that. So Notre Dame has to reestablish their identity up front, and the offensive line doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to play with force. They need to be violent. They need to be the ones initiating the contact early, and I expect Notre Dame to play a lot better on the offensive line because this is a prideful unit. They've got really good players, and I'm sure that they were embarrassed by their performance against Miami, and I think they're going to bounce back in a big way. But it all falls on them because you can give the ball to Jeremiyah Love, but if he's getting tackled from the moment he gets the ball, that's not going to work. And you can try to initiate a downfield passing game with CJ Carr, but if he doesn't have time, that's not going to work either. So it really all falls on the offensive line's shoulders, but I do expect a big performance from them going into Texas A&M. So now we know what the problems are, but what's really at stake when the Irish take the field on Saturday night? It's coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. College football is back, and I could not be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It is the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. The app made it super simple. I could even see the exact view from my seat before buying. I love zone deals too. Pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. And if you're still looking for tickets to watch Notre Dame take on Texas A&M in the home opener, be sure to check out Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. There's a couple more things I want to hit on from Marcus Freeman's press conference before we wrap up today's show. The first one has to do with playing an SEC team. So Marcus Freeman was asked directly about whether it's like a measuring stick game for Notre Dame to go up against a big-time SEC school. And he said, quote, "It's more than the conference. I think it's the opponent. The opportunity to play Texas A&M is all the motive you need. College football respects Texas A&M and the job they've done." And he's trying to downplay the conference angle, which I totally understand, right? I think way too often teams are like built up because they're in the SEC and they're completely average. Trust me, growing up in Louisville, a bunch of my friends were Kentucky fans, and they had this very delusional outlook on the Kentucky Wildcat football program just because they were in the SEC. They were like, oh, well, if they were in the ACC, they would have gone 10-2, 11-1 every year. No, Kentucky football is perpetually 7-5. Sorry to any UK fans out there watching or listening. I doubt there's a ton of you. But I do think that it is important to beat an SEC team because like Marcus Freeman has had a lot of success going up against SEC teams. They beat South Carolina in the Gator Bowl a few years ago. They beat Texas A&M in Kyle Field to start off last season. They beat Georgia, the SEC champion, in the college football playoff. So this isn't about proving that they belong in the same field as an SEC team, but I do think that when you continue to beat SEC teams, that's a big deal, right? Because that is the best conference in college football, as much as it pains me to admit. They are the best conference. They have the best teams. They have the best players. There's really no disputing that. So the more SEC teams you beat, the better it is. So it's not a measuring stick game, but it is a great opportunity. It's not just about beating another top 25 opponent. It's about restoring some of that national respect after the loss to Miami and doing it against a program with big-time size, big-time talent, and also depth. And when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, like, this is probably their last chance to secure a big win during the regular season, so they have to get this done now. If they go out there and they beat a good SEC team at home in week 2, coming off a disappointing loss to Miami, I think in the eyes of the national college football world, everyone is going to be back on the Notre Dame bandwagon. They have a ton of momentum from the offseason. They're ranked 8th. They actually moved up in the AP rankings this past week despite not playing a game, and I think that's because a lot of people have respect for what Notre Dame has right now, not just in the roster, but what they had done in last year's college football playoff. And even though I don't always love when there's a ton of carryover, considering the amount of people and players that Notre Dame brought back on this team, I think that it's earned. But they have to go out there and they have to show it. They cannot afford to start off 0-2 and lose to the 2 best teams that they played during the regular season, which actually leads me to my final point here, the last thing I want to address from Marcus Freeman's press conference. He was asked about where this team is headed, the program response, things like that after starting out 0-1. And he said, quote, "You look at last year and this year, we're 1-0 and 0-1. But take away the outcome, where are we as a program in terms of trying to reach our full potential?" And that has become a common Marcus Freeman cliche. They're not trying to win a national championship. They're trying to reach their full potential. Well, if this team reaches their full potential, they're going to win a national championship. So in a roundabout way, that's what he's talking about here. This game is not just about the record, though. It's about the identity. And Marcus Freeman is saying as much by saying they need to reach their full potential. Did Notre Dame learn from the loss against Miami, or are the same flaws still lingering? And if Notre Dame loses again, I think this season's upside takes a major hit. But more importantly, it eliminates a ton of the momentum that this program has following the run to the national championship. It's not going to be all down to the dumps. It's not like all the top recruits they signed during the offseason are now all of a sudden going to decommit because they had a rough start to the season. And that's, if they lose to Texas A&M, there's still a possibility that they go 10-2, right? But that's not really what it's about. They would just kind of fall off the face of the earth in terms of like perception and relevance in this season and this college football playoff. And when you have this good of a team with this many talented players, future NFL draft picks, when the program, the school, the NIL collectors, when they have invested this amount of money into the roster, like that's a really big deal. You have to go out there. You have to try to win every single time you're out there. And I feel like you only have so many opportunities every season to prove that you belong in the biggest stage against the best teams in college football. And that is exactly what Notre Dame has on Saturday. Last year's team, they responded to early adversity. It wasn't always pretty, but after they lost to Northern Illinois, they beat the brakes off Purdue. They struggled a little bit against Miami, Ohio, but then they beat a ranked Louisville team at home. That game was a weird game, but they were in total control of that game from beginning to end. That was their first big opportunity to sort of rectify the loss to Northern Illinois. Then after that, they had the bye week, and they just started destroying every other team on the schedule. If Notre Dame goes out there and they beat Texas A&M and then they start pummeling the rest of the teams on their schedule, which is what they should do, because after this game, outside of USC, no one comes close to the amount of talent that this roster has. So this is a very, very important game. This is a huge moment for this team and this program, and I'm going to be very interested to see how they start this game, because Marcus Freeman has harped on focus and intensity and starting out fast. And if the Irish come out flat again, that is a big red flag, especially at home in the home opener. The crowd is going to be electric. I can't wait to be there on Saturday night. The fan base understands the importance, the magnitude of this matchup, and they're going to come ready to go. And it's on this team. It's on the leaders of this team to make sure that everyone is ready to go and to put out their best effort. And as Marcus Freeman likes to say, play to their full potential. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Irish. Thank you so much for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you enjoyed the show, please like the video below, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, Be sure to follow the show and drop a quick 5-star rating and review. It really helps a ton. And do not forget, we've got another Friday mailbag coming up. So send your questions in the YouTube comments, on X at Locked On Irish, or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. I'm going to be back tomorrow with my full preview of Notre Dame's huge game against Texas A&M with my scouting report, my keys to the game predictions, all of that stuff. So be out on the lookout for that, and also be on the lookout for Locked On's college football kickoff show this Thursday, only available on Fire TV. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. I'll see you right here tomorrow, same time, same place.